Hello, my dear sleepy listener. Tonight, we're travelling back to a time of quiet transformation, a moment when an old world folded itself gently into the arms of the new. This is the story of Japan's most extraordinary turning point, the reign of Emperor Meiji from 1867 to 1912. A story not of war drums or roaring machines, but of whispers through pine forests, silk rustling in candlelight, and the quiet resolve of a young emperor preparing to step into the unknown. Before you drift away into peaceful slumber, please take a moment to like this video, leave a gentle comment about your favourite historical moment, and subscribe to keep these soothing tales coming your way. And if you'd like, tell us where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let these gentle whispers of history lull you into sleep. You awaken in the twilight halls of Kyoto's Gosho Imperial Palace in the year 1867. Tatami mats creak softly beneath careful steps. A hush has fallen across the ancient court. Outside, a low wind sighs through bamboo groves. Inside, beneath a lacquered ceiling of painted dragons and chrysanthemums, a 15-year-old boy with serene eyes and a heavy silk robe prepares to inherit an empire and a storm. This boy is Mutsuhito. In mere hours, he will be known to the world as Emperor Meiji, but he does not yet rule in truth. The real power still rests with the Tokugawa shogunate, an ancient military regime that has guided Japan for centuries with a steady, if increasingly tired, hand. The emperor, hidden behind brocade screens and ritual, is more symbol than sovereign. Until now. Outside the palace walls, the world is shifting. Samurai loyal to the south, to Satsuma, Choshu, and Tosa, whisper of revolution. Steamships prowl coastal waters. Foreign traders pace impatiently in treaty ports, their strange clothes rustling like paper. The old ways, once unquestioned, now seem fragile. The boy emperor's expression is calm, but his world is already dissolving around him. As he ascends the throne in a private ceremony, incense swirling in gold-flecked clouds, the ritual is whispered in the ancient language of court poetry, but the meaning is anything but poetic. The last Tokugawa shogun, Yoshinobu, has agreed to step aside. The Bakufu, the shogunal government, is disintegrating. A new beginning waits. The enthronement is not the grand spectacle you might imagine. No soaring anthems, no trumpets, only a few court nobles bowing low, their long sleeves brushing the floor. And beyond the walls, a tension you can almost taste. The court keeps everything hushed, as it has for centuries. But even the cicadas outside seem to pause. A small, quirky detail lingers here, often overlooked in textbooks at this moment of national upheaval. Emperor Meiji still wears his hair in the long, traditional style of the nobility, flowing down his back like a silken river. It will be years before he appears in military uniform, stern and modern. For now, he is just a young man, unsure of his place in a crumbling hierarchy. Historians still debate how much power Meiji truly had in these early days. Was he merely a figurehead, moved like a chess piece by ambitious nobles and military leaders, or did he possess from the beginning a subtle strength, a quiet ability to influence from behind the veil? The truth, as ever, floats somewhere in the mist. You sit by the courtyard, where the evening light pools like ink. The scent of camellia drifts past as a single bell tolls in the distance. This is the moment the Meiji era begins, not with a clash, with a whisper. The boy emperor stands, takes one final look toward the imperial gardens, and steps forward into history. You open your eyes again beneath the smoky skies of Edo, not yet called Tokyo, in the early weeks of 1868. The winter wind blows down wide streets once filled with samurai processions. Now, those streets are quieter, though tension lingers like frost on the rooftops. This is no ordinary season. The Tokugawa shogunate has officially fallen, not with a thunderous collapse, but like an old scroll quietly being rolled up and placed on a high shelf. The final shogun, Yoshinobu, has returned power to the emperor in what's called the Taisei Hokan, the restoration of imperial rule, a formal gesture that says everything and nothing. But not all swords were sheathed so willingly. You walk along a canal where banners hang limply, the crests of once proud clans faded by sun and uncertainty. You hear whispers of the Satsuma Choshu alliance growing bolder, of skirmishes in the hills. In Kyoto, the Boshin War has begun. It's not a great war by the world's standards, but it's enough to shake centuries of order. You pass a tea shop where the owner, an elderly woman with kind eyes, still refers to the shogun as the true ruler, out of habit, not defiance. The younger generation disagrees. A boy at the next table sketches the emperor's crest, the 16-petaled chrysanthemum, into the condensation on his cup. You realize, perhaps for the first time, that revolution doesn't always shout. Sometimes it draws quietly in the margins. You arrive at Edo Castle, or what remains of its meaning, just a few months ago. This fortress symbolized the military government's iron grip. Now, under solemn negotiation, it will soon be handed over to the imperial forces without a siege. There is a strange courtesy to it all. The shogunate's fall is not marked by beheadings or carnage, but by letters exchanged and quiet nods between old enemies. Saigo Takamori, the Satsuma general, negotiates with Edo's defenders as though they were old friends parting ways at a spring festival. You almost expect them to share sake before the gates are opened, and then they are. The gates to Edo Castle swing open, not to an invading army, but to a procession. Imperial envoys dressed in new hybrid uniforms that blend courtly robes with Western buttons. The symbolic heart of Tokugawa power is yielded without a scream. Soon after, Edo is renamed Tokyo, Eastern capital. The emperor will come here in the months ahead, but for now, he remains in Kyoto, distant but ever more present. One detail remains especially human in the confusion of transition. Records show that some samurai, unsure where their loyalties should lie, simply stopped wearing their swords in public, not out of obedience, but out of quiet embarrassment. The rituals no longer fit. And as for the larger story, historians still wonder, could Yoshinobu have resisted more fiercely? Was his surrender noble or merely pragmatic? Some argue he saw the writing on the wall and sought to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. Others claim he was pressured, even blackmailed, by forces more ruthless than history remembers kindly. You sit by the moat, watching carp drift beneath the bridge. The city hums faintly behind you, not with the clamour of victory, but with the uncertain rustle of change. No one is quite sure what Tokyo will become. Not yet, but the shadows of the shogunate are lifting, inch by inch. The imperial crest flutters gently above the former shogun's fortress. You breathe in the cool air, tinged with pine and coal smoke, and feel the ground shift ever so slightly beneath your feet. You awaken to the sound of drums, not the drums of war, but of procession, It is April of 1868, and the imperial court has gathered in Kyoto for something rare, something bold. Today, the emperor will issue a public oath, not in private ritual, not in hushed tones behind silk, but out in the open. You stand among the crowd, nestled beneath blooming cherry trees in the gardens of the Kyoto Imperial Palace. Sunlight filters through the petals, scattering across robes in hues of ink, saffron and moss. The murmurs are low but reverent. Everyone senses that something has changed, that this isn't the same emperor as before. Emperor Meiji emerges quietly, his presence composed and clear. Though still a teenager, he walks with purpose. At his side are newly appointed officials, some in Western-style uniforms, others still in the long flowing garments of tradition. The mixture is strange, but somehow beautiful, a reflection of the moment itself. And then he speaks. The Charter Oath, as it will come to be known, is delivered in court language, but its echoes are unmistakable. 5 sweeping pledges that will define an era-broad deliberation in governance, the unity of all classes, the abandonment of outdated customs, the pursuit of knowledge from the world, and, most importantly, the promise that the common people may pursue their own calling. You hear them read aloud as the air stills. Knowledge shall be sought throughout the world, so as to strengthen the foundations of imperial rule. It is a startling vision, not divine right, not military might, but learning, consultation, change. A small, almost comic moment occurs during the ceremony. A minor official, unfamiliar with the new speech rhythms, mispronounces a crucial phrase and nearly topples a ceremonial stand while bowing. The crowd, unsure whether to laugh or gasp, settles on silence. But the emperor's eyes twinkle for just a moment. This is one of the many scenes rarely mentioned in textbooks, the slight awkwardness of reinvention. You remain as the ceremony concludes, watching the officials bow and disperse, their sandals scuffing the gravel paths. The crowd is slow to leave. Many linger to take it in, not the specifics of the oath, which most won't remember word for word, but the feeling, the openness, the sense that Japan has stepped through a doorway. Later that day, you wander past a calligraphy shop. The owner is hurriedly copying the oath onto long banners. A schoolteacher purchases one for his classroom. A fishmonger tacks it above his stall. Already, the words are being folded into daily life, the first ripples of what will become the Meiji Restoration. Historians largely agree that the Charter Oath was a watershed moment, but they still debate its authorship. Was it Meiji's own idea? Was it composed by his advisors? Did the young emperor believe every word, or was it mostly symbolic? It is likely, as always, a mix. But symbolism matters, especially when spoken aloud for the first time in centuries. The oath doesn't create instant democracy. Not yet, but it sets a tone. It promises direction. It tells farmers and merchants, soldiers and scholars that they belong in this new era, and you feel it too. You watch as an old man slowly bows before the imperial pavilion, holding his grandson's hand. The child tugs gently, eager to run off and chase a kite. But the old man holds a little longer, perhaps remembering how different things were not so long ago. The petals drift down like snow. The ink dries on the banners. The empire, once frozen in formality, is now fluid, curious, awake. You close your eyes as the breeze carries the scent of plum wine as fresh parchment. The emperor's words echo in your memory, not loud, but steady, and something within you begins to stir, just as gently. You stir beneath soft grey skies as a new city breathes around you. The year is 1869 and Edo is gone, not physically, not yet, but in name, in soul, in silence. This place is now Tokyo, the eastern capital, where Japan's future will take root. You walk slowly through its streets, where horse-drawn carts jostle alongside men in hakama and the occasional foreign carriage with painted wheels. Buildings still bear the curved tiles and wooden eaves of the old ways, but scaffolding creeps upward in corners of the city like bamboo sprouting through stone. The changes are not loud, not yet, but they are everywhere if you know how to listen. The Emperor has arrived. His relocation from Kyoto to Tokyo is more than ceremonial. It is a quiet revolution. For the first time in over a millennium, the imperial court lives among the people. The old palace of Edo Castle has been renamed the Imperial Palace, and its walls now hold mourning audiences, foreign envoys, and dreams of a nation reborn. You pass through Nihonbashi, the old commercial centre of the city, where rice brokers once dominated the economy. Now, talk shifts to things like telegraphs and glass windows. The shops hum with new goods, kerosene lamps, imported cloth, Western medicine in strange blue bottles. A child runs by clutching a tiny model train carved from wood. You pause near a shrine tucked between two merchant houses. An old priest gently sweeps the stone steps, ignoring the way his neighbours now hang clocks on their walls and send their sons to study German chemistry. He's seen cities change before, but perhaps never quite like this. One small, surprising detail when the Emperor first arrived in Tokyo. He stayed in what was essentially a guest house, not yet ready to inhabit the full grandeur of Edo Castle. The palace grounds were still being rearranged, and legend has it that during his first night in the new capital, he listened to the city's unfamiliar hum with quiet curiosity, perhaps even unease. Even the most powerful must learn to sleep in strange places, you suppose. As you cross the Sumida River, you see signs of the city's practical transformation. A new postal system is in motion, and a few lampposts bear oil-lit lanterns instead of candles. You overhear talk of gas lights coming soon and possibly electricity. One innkeeper claims to have heard of a machine that can cool rooms in the summer. Impossible. Someone laughs. Unnatural, says another. But their eyes glint with wonder. Yet not everything changes overnight. Tokyo is still a city of shadows and lanterns, of clogs on cobblestone and the rustle of paper screens. You pass a theatre where a kabuki actor performs a centuries-old tale. The audience laughs and cries as though nothing has changed at all. Historians still argue over whether moving the emperor to Tokyo was truly transformative or merely symbolic. Was it a strategic move to consolidate power near the economic centre, or a genuine embrace of modernization and accessibility? Whatever the reason, the symbolism was potent. The emperor's presence made Tokyo the living heart of the nation, not just a political centre, but an emotional one. By nightfall, the city glows softly under moonlight. You find yourself standing beneath a young tree planted beside a new government building, a sapling brought from Kyoto, meant to root old wisdom in this modern ground. Nearby, a group of students practice their English under flickering lanterns. One mispronounces Constitution and bursts into laughter, his friends joining in. You smile. Tokyo is not yet a modern city, but it is no longer Edo. It is something in between, like a bridge half built across a wide river, both ancient and new, uncertain and bold. and as the wind lifts your sleeve and carries the faint scent of charcoal and ink, you realize you're standing in the middle of a dream just beginning to form. You rise with the morning mist curling through Tokyo's narrow alleys, drawn by the rhythmic clicking of looms. It's the early 1870s now, and deep within workshops and humble homes, a quiet miracle is underway. Japan is threading its way into the global fabric, quite literally, one silk strand at a time. You step into a room filled with warmth and motion. Young girls sit in rows, their sleeves pinned back, their fingers deftly guiding thread through gleaming spindles. This is one of the countless sericulture workshops springing up across the country, some government-run, others family enterprises. Silk is becoming Japan's golden lifeline. The air is filled with the scent of hot water and raw fibre. You watch a girl not older than 13 coaxing silk from cocoons, her expression both focused and serene. She hums softly, a tune her grandmother taught her, handed down like a spindle itself. In the corner, another girl passes a crumpled letter to her friend, a love note, perhaps from a boy training in distant Yokohama. The girls giggle behind their sleeves. Their labour supports the nation's rise. Silk becomes Japan's top export, pouring out through treaty ports into the eager hands of merchants in France and America. With each cocoon unravelled, the empire stretches its threads into the world. Just a few streets away, another revolution is in motion, this one written in ink. You enter a classroom, simple but proud. The floorboards creak and chalk dust floats in the light. A teacher in round spectacles points to a blackboard filled with kanji and Roman letters side by side. The students, boys and girls, recite phrases together, sometimes pausing to laugh at the strange curves of English. Japan's first nationwide education system is now in place. The Gakusei, or Education Code, has declared that all children, not just the noble or the rich, deserve to learn. Schools appear in villages and towns like bamboo shoots after rain. Not everyone attends, and resistance remains, especially in rural areas. But the idea has taken root. You pause as a small boy holds up a slate where he has drawn a clumsy map of the world. He's labelled Japan carefully, almost reverently, in bold Roman characters, Japan. A lesser-known detail, many rural students wore wooden tags around their necks with their names and villages, a kind of early ID in case they became lost on their long walks to school. Some of these tags survive in museums, soft, worn, and carved with care. But not all welcome these changes with open arms. Historians note resistance in pockets of the countryside. There were rumours that the schools would steal children's souls or force them to abandon their traditions. Some communities burned textbooks. Others refused to send daughters, fearing that literacy would make them too bold. Was it fear of the unfamiliar or an intuitive concern about the speed of change? The debate continues, but slowly. The books were opened, the lessons began. Back at the silk mill, you overhear a whispered conversation. One of the girls has heard of a new school nearby, a place where even factory workers can study arithmetic at night. Her eyes widen with wonder, and just for a moment, her hands pause on the thread. The machines resume their hum. The chalk is wiped away. The cocoon unwinds. You walk out into the sunlight, where laundry flutters like flags of a new age. And in the hush between footsteps, you feel it again, that pulse beneath the city, that soft insistence Japan is learning, weaving, changing. You close your eyes and breathe in the scent of steamed rice and ink, and somewhere, the bell rings, calling another class to begin. You awaken to the soft scrape of a razor gliding across skin, not your own, but that of a reluctant samurai seated cross-legged before a narrow mirror. He winces slightly, not from pain, but from the unfamiliar sensation of change. His topknot, the Emperor Meiji, is gone. The year is 1871, and the Meiji government has issued a peculiar command: cut your hair. It sounds simple, even trivial, but it isn't. The Datsutokure, or haircutting edict, is part of a broader effort to modernize appearance and sweep away visible markers of the old order. The emperor himself now wears his hair short and his jacket buttoned, and so, with quiet tension, men across Japan line up at barbers for the first time in their lives, not for grooming, but for symbolic transformation. You watch as the samurai touches his newly bare neck. His wife stands behind him, hiding her gasp with her sleeve. Neither says a word. All around the city, a strange industry emerges. Barbers, once a marginal profession, become agents of modernization. Some even hang signs outside their shops offering imperial cuts. One quirky poster shows a Western gentleman with slick parted hair and the tagline, "Become civilized, sit, snip, succeed." But not all transitions go smoothly. In small towns and mountain villages, topknots remain for years. There are even scattered incidents of barbers being chased out by angry locals, their scissors viewed as tools of shame. You pass a tiny temple where 3 elderly men sit in silence, their hair still long, their gazes firm. They refuse to cut what they consider sacred. One quietly mutters, "You can modernize the sword, not the soul." A moment of defiance beneath the rustling pines. Still, most comply, and soon, hair becomes just hair again, not a declaration, but a choice. As you wander into a tailor's shop nearby, you see another transformation underway. Western suits are becoming popular, especially among bureaucrats and merchants. A tailor named Hori-san proudly shows off his latest jacket imported wool, brass buttons, hand-stitched lining. He chuckles and admits that he still doesn't understand why Europeans wear neckties in the summer. It's a small joke, but it hangs in the air like incense, the tension between old customs and new expectations. Historians have long debated the true impact of these appearance reforms. Some argue they were largely symbolic, that cutting hair didn't change hearts. Others see them as part of a calculated psychological shift, reshape how people see themselves, and society will follow. You walk through Ueno Park, where painters sketch men in new uniforms and women in layered dresses with curious frills. Children play with wooden pistols, mimicking foreign soldiers they've never seen. An old artist nearby mutters that he misses drawing topknots. They gave the head such interesting lines. And yet, you feel no anger in the air, only hesitation, curiosity, that gentle tug of change pulling at every sleeve. As evening falls, you pass a bathhouse where 2 friends argue about their haircuts. One says he looks like an Englishman, the other insists he looks like a thief. They laugh. The water steams. The moon rises. You step into a lantern-lit alley where shadows dance against smooth walls, no longer interrupted by high crests of traditional hair. The silhouette of the samurai has shifted, but the spirit, the quiet resilience remains. You exhale, and your breath trails softly into the night, like smoke from an extinguished candle. You open your eyes to the gentle clatter of porcelain and the unfamiliar scent of foreign cologne. The year is 1872, and you find yourself seated at a lacquered table in a reception hall of Tokyo's newly renovated imperial palace. Light streams through the window panes. Yes, panes, made of glass shipped all the way from Europe, and cast curious reflections on the polished floors. You're not alone. Across the room, European diplomats sip tea beside Japanese nobles in layered court robes. American advisors adjust their stiff collars as interpreters whisper translations. It is an extraordinary scene, stovepipe hats next to lacquered hair combs, velvet waistcoats beside silk kimonos. You're witnessing one of Emperor Meiji's new customs, the audience with foreign representatives. These state meetings are meant to show Japan's openness, refinement, and, perhaps most urgently, parity with the Western world. The Emperor enters with quiet poise. He wears a Western-style military uniform adorned with golden embroidery and a double-breasted sash. It's a stunning departure from the long, flowing garments of his youth. Every inch of him declares, we are not behind. We are rejoining the world. And yet, the room does not lose its stillness. The silence feels measured, not awkward, respectful. Everyone bows in their own way. The etiquette is still being negotiated. You glance at the tea table, where mismatched porcelain cups tell their own story. Some are Japanese, hand-painted with cherry blossoms. Others are English bone china, recently imported. One cup, you note with some amusement, has a tiny chip that someone tried to conceal with gold leaf, a quiet nod to kintsugi, the Japanese art of mending what is broken with beauty, a curious, human moment. The Western visitors are everywhere now, not just in palaces but on streets, in schools, in ministries. Many serve as oyotoi gaikokujin, or foreign employees, hired to help modernize Japan. They teach everything from engineering to etiquette, from rail design to courtroom procedure. One American teaches ballroom dancing to naval cadets. A Frenchman is in charge of laying sewer pipes. A German doctor runs a new hospital. You pass one in the hallway now, scratching notes on a pad and muttering something about how polite everyone is. Still, not all goes smoothly. Cultural missteps are frequent. A Belgian engineer complains about being asked to remove his shoes indoors. A Japanese bureaucrat is offended when an Englishman declines to bow. Misunderstandings bloom like wildflowers. Awkward, sometimes funny, sometimes tense. You walk past a garden where a British botanist gestures excitedly at a bonsai tree, trying to explain the concept of aesthetic restraint to a puzzled American colleague. Neither fully understands, but both are enchanted. Historians still debate how much these foreign experts truly shaped the Meiji reforms. Were they indispensable architects, or merely short-term tutors? Some left behind legacies that lasted generations. Others stayed only a few months, baffled by the intricacies of the culture they came to modernize. As you step back into the palace hall, you notice how the building itself embodies this strange harmony. A chandelier from Germany hangs above a tatami floor. Sliding paper doors open onto Western-style meeting rooms. The clash of design, oddly, feels balanced. A careful dance of diplomacy and pride. A little girl, perhaps a court official's daughter, runs past you holding a stuffed toy, a hybrid creature with the body of a rabbit and the face of a lion. She's invented it herself, she says, to represent a brave animal that knows how to listen. You smile, unsure whether she's speaking about animals or nations. Evening approaches. Candles are lit. The guests begin to leave. You stand by the door and bow gently, an old gesture in a new world. Outside, the Tokyo night hums softly with foreign languages and native lullabies. The stars above do not choose sides. And beneath them, Japan continues to blend what it must and preserve what it can, with grace, with caution, and with the elegance of tea poured carefully into a chipped but golden cup. You awaken to a soft, rhythmic clatter beneath your feet, not horse hooves or wooden sandals, but the steady hum of iron wheels. You're aboard one of Japan's very first passenger trains, rolling gently through the countryside between Tokyo and Yokohama. The year is 1872 and the rails have begun to whisper a new tune across the land. Outside the wide glass windows, rice paddies flicker past in glimmering rows. Farmers pause mid-hoe to watch the strange metal beast glide by. Some children run alongside the track, waving frantically. Others hide behind trees, unsure if this train is a gift or a demon. Even the cranes seem uncertain, lifting lazily into the air as your engine bellows a short, proud whistle. Inside, the train carriage smells faintly of wood varnish and coal smoke. The benches are polished, and the windows smudged with fingerprints of curious passengers. Beside you, an elderly man in traditional robes clutches the seat with both hands, not from fear, but because he still expects the ground to move beneath him like a rickshaw. This is the Tokaido Line's beginning, Japan's first railway, planned with British engineers and built with relentless determination, is a marvel of the Meiji dream. The train's top speed is modest, just over 30 kilometers per hour, but for a nation rooted in footpaths and ferries, it feels like flying. You pass through Shinagawa, then Kawasaki, towns that once bustled with foot traffic, now reinventing themselves as stops on a steel artery. Roads curve to meet the tracks. Inns spring up near the stations. Progress, it seems, is contagious. And then, quite suddenly, the train slows. The conductor, wearing a western cap slightly too large for his head, leans out the window and calls something in a mix of English and Japanese. You can't help but smile. No one knows the exact words yet. The vocabulary of modern travel is still being written. One delightfully odd story from these early train rides, it said that when the train first launched, some passengers believed they would become ill if they travelled faster than a running man. To ease fears, attendants sometimes walked alongside the train at the beginning of each journey, waving calmly as if to say, "See, no one is dying." Eventually, speed became a comfort, not a threat. You exit the train in Yokohama, blinking in the sunlight. The station is modest, but the mood is jubilant. A group of students gathers around a timetable nailed to the wall, puzzling over the foreign script. A merchant tries to sell oranges from a cart decorated with painted wheels, a nod to the trains themselves. Historians still reflect on whether Japan's rapid rail expansion was purely about transportation, or whether it served a deeper purpose, unifying the archipelago, erasing distance between old provinces, binding the once fragmented regions into a single, humming entity. The answer, perhaps, is both. You wander through the outskirts of Yokohama, following the line of new tracks as they vanish into the horizon. Alongside them, telegraph wires stretch taut, stringing not just rail but voice across the land. News, once carried by foot or boat, can now travel faster than wind. A farmer from Chiba can hear of a shipment from Nagasaki by sundown. Near the track, two boys practice balancing coins on the rails, a childhood game soon to be banned. One whispers that the train can flatten a coin into a mirror. The other says it can turn thoughts into smoke. They both nod solemnly. As twilight falls, the train begins its return trip to Tokyo, headlights flickering like distant lanterns. You remain beside the track a moment longer, watching the rails shimmer in the low sun, stretching endlessly across fields, forests, and time. The ground beneath them may be ancient, but the direction is unmistakably forward. You awaken beneath a pale sky, your breath visible in the morning chill. You're not in Japan today, not even on familiar soil. You sit aboard a steamship, its deck slick with ocean spray as it glides westward through fog. The year is 1871 and you are part of something bold, the Iwakura mission. Aboard the ship with you are over 50 of Japan's brightest minds, statesmen, scholars, and young students, some no older than 12, all journeying across the world to learn, their goal to see, to study, to return. This voyage is not one of conquest or tourism. It is, in every way, a mission of curiosity. Leading the delegation is Iwakura Tomomi, a dignified nobleman wrapped in a cloak of quiet determination. He stands near the rail, eyes fixed on the sea ahead. With him are future prime ministers, ministers of education, industrial advisors, and somewhere among the trunks and trunks of luggage questions, thousands of them, you arrive in San Francisco, where horses pull streetcars and gas lamps flicker along brick streets. The Japanese delegation is received with cautious interest. They tour schools and factories. They marvel at banks and bridges. In Washington, D.C. They meet with President Ulysses S. Grant himself, a quiet handshake, a formal dinner, and a bouquet of polite confusion on both sides. Then they continue to Britain, France, Prussia, Russia, and beyond. In each nation, they study constitutions, mining systems, steel production, universities, and post offices. In Manchester, a young delegate sketches the workings of a cotton mill. In Berlin, they sit in parliaments, furiously taking notes. In Paris, they observe civil codes and public hospitals. Their questions are endless. How do you tax fairly? How do you educate a farmer's child? What is the balance between a monarch and a ministry? One quietly remarkable moment happens in London. A Japanese official is seen standing in front of the British Museum, notebook in hand, whispering to himself, "We are walking through the bones of their empire." He means it with awe, not envy. The Iwakura mission lasts nearly 2 years. Some of the teenage students remain behind, enrolled in schools and universities in the West. They will return later, fluent in both language and vision, destined to help rebuild their country from within. One small, often forgotten detail, the mission was not only about admiration. At times, it was about disappointment. Many delegates realized that the West was not a land of perfect wisdom. In New York, they encountered poverty and prejudice. In Paris, they noted vanity and bureaucracy. They learned not just what to imitate, but what to avoid. And this too is valuable. Historians still discuss the mission's long-term influence. Some claim it shaped Meiji Japan more than any other single act, planting the seeds of a constitutional government, industrial policy, and international diplomacy. Others argue its findings were diluted upon return, constrained by political realities and internal resistance. Perhaps both are true. But what cannot be denied is this: the mission gave Japan a mirror held up to the world. And when they looked into it, they saw not strangers, but potential. You return to Japan in 1873. The sea smells different somehow. The mountains more ancient. You stand at the harbour in Yokohama as the delegation disembarks, their trunks heavier with books and sketches. their minds filled with possibilities. They will soon meet with Emperor Meiji, presenting their findings in scrolls and charts. Their words will echo through the halls of government. We must choose wisely. The world is large. Let us learn from it. You watch the young students run ahead of the older delegates, eager to see home again, but forever changed, a mission complete, a journey just beginning. You wake beneath a morning sky tinged with gunmetal grey, a hint of smoke, a shimmer of sunrise. The year is 1873 and the air feels strangely divided, as if Japan is standing with one foot in the sword-wielding past and one in the bugle-blaring present. You're standing near a dusty drill field just outside Tokyo. Rows of young men, all conscripts, march in unison across the open ground. Their uniforms are rough wool, patterned on French military dress, blue tunics, brass buttons, belts cinched tight. Some stumble slightly, still learning the rhythm. One or two glance sideways, unused to being yelled at by officers who used to be fishermen. This is Japan's new national army, created under the conscription ordinance of 1873. Gone are the days when samurai held a monopoly on martial power. Now, every male citizen, regardless of class, is eligible to serve. A revolutionary idea, simple on paper, but deeply unsettling in practice. You walk along the perimeter of the field, where small groups of villagers watch in stunned silence. One elderly farmer whispers, "Even a peasant boy with good legs can wear a sword now." His tone is not angry, just amazed. Not all are pleased. Across the country, riots erupt. Peasants fear losing sons to war, while former samurai resent the loss of their ancient role. Some towns submit petitions, others send quiet threats. In a few places, wooden effigies of government officials are burned beside shrines. Inside the training tents, debates crackle like kindling. Should Japan model its forces after the French, who emphasize spirit and élan, or the Germans, who prize discipline and efficiency? Officers bicker, sometimes politely, sometimes not. The Emperor, still young but increasingly aware, listens to both sides with stoic grace. One quirky tale from these early reforms during a field inspection: a French military advisor reportedly burst into laughter when he discovered that Japanese soldiers had been instructed to shout while charging, not to intimidate, but simply to overcome nerves. Like samurai ghosts, he called them, noisy but brave. You walk through a tent where officers polish cannons and test binoculars. Maps hang from the walls, maps not of war zones, but of rice farming provinces now marked with dots and regimental flags. The lines between agriculture and artillery blur, yet even within the reforms, contradictions emerge. Scholars today still debate the true motives behind conscription. Was it meant to modernize military defense, or was it a tool to instill national loyalty, to turn regional subjects into imperial citizens? Perhaps both. But the shift is undeniable. Japan is no longer a patchwork of domains. It is an empire with one army, one emperor, one rising ambition. You stroll through an alley of workshops where gunsmiths now replace swordsmiths. The clang of metal echoes down the lane. One elderly blacksmith mutters that rifle barrels lack the poetry of a blade. Still, he sharpens them with care. Nearby, a young boy stares through a shop window at a painted lithograph of a Japanese soldier in full modern uniform. The boy presses his fingers to the glass, tracing the edges of the coat. You wonder if he dreams of glory, or simply a chance to walk beyond the borders of his village. Twilight falls as you return to the field. The drills are over. The men disperse. Some laugh, others limp. A few bow toward the imperial palace before leaving, a ritual no one taught them, but which has quietly taken hold. You listen as the night settles over the earth. The sound of boots fades. Somewhere, a kettle whistles. And in the stillness, the question lingers: how much of the past can a nation carry into the future before it must set something down? You exhale softly and walk on. You awaken to the gentle click of a typewriter and the rustle of paper doors sliding open. The year is 1875 and Tokyo's beginning to buzz, not just with machines, but with messages. You step into a narrow street just before dawn, where the air hums with possibility and the morning fog still clings to the tiled rooftops. This is a city in conversation with itself. To your left, a telegraph office glows softly under the flicker of gas lamps. Inside, operators tap out letters in Morse code, their faces calm and focused. Each message leaps from one end of the country to the other, faster than any courier horse ever could. It's a quiet revolution, unfolding in dots and dashes. Across the street, a group of merchants gather outside a tea house, clutching slips of paper, reports from Osaka, Nagasaki, even far-off Hokkaido. They read with narrowed eyes, absorbing news that only yesterday would have taken weeks to arrive. A shipment delayed, a price change in silk, a whisper of war in Korea. Everything moves faster now. But just a few doors down, you find another scene entirely, one that could have existed centuries ago. A geisha house. Its lantern, still dim in the early light, glows with a quieter rhythm. Inside, a few patrons linger, sipping tea and listening to the final notes of a shamisen performance. The woman playing it wears a brilliant red obi and a thoughtful smile. She pauses mid-song to read a telegram handed to her by an attendant. The message is brief, a poem in 5 lines, sent by a distant admirer. She nods once and continues playing, the melody now laced with unspoken meaning. It's a beautifully jarring sight, old and new, melody and machinery, existing in the same breath. You step into a small bookstore tucked between 2 sake shops. The shelves are filled with translations of Western novels, Dickens and Hugo, adapted for a Japanese audience, but also volumes of Wakon Yosai thought, Japanese spirit, Western learning. The owner, a middle-aged scholar with spectacles that slide perpetually down his nose, explains how young readers now debate whether modernity must erase tradition or whether the two can be sewn together, like silk and hemp in an old kimono. One humorous detail he shares: he recently sold out of a serialized novel in which a Japanese detective, inspired by Sherlock Holmes, solves crimes using Confucian logic. The readers don't always understand the clues, he chuckles, but they love the moustache. Historians often point to this period as a pivotal cultural blending. Not the loud reforms of military conscription or constitutional debates, but the subtle seep of modernity into conversation, storytelling, manners. The telegraph wires stretched like spider silk, quiet but strong. The typewriter keys clicked in offices where clerks wore kimono but wrote in Western script, and still, the questions whispered under lanterns remained. How much should we change? How fast is too fast? You continue walking, passing a school where children practice reading telegrams aloud, their voices rising like birds in spring. Down the block, a newspaper printer operates a hand-cranked press, its wheels screeching softly as it spits out headlines. One of the boys grabs a fresh page and shouts, "Emperor's words to be published tomorrow," before racing off into the morning air. It's easy to forget, in all this transformation, how fragile it still is. The paper is thin, the wires are delicate. The faith in progress is new, and yet it is there. You pause by the Sumida River. Across its gently rippling waters, a silhouette of a ferryboat drifts, lanterns swinging. The moon still hangs low, and the electric wires above it stretch endlessly into the distance. As the first telegraph bell rings again behind you, a simple ding, you realize it's no longer a foreign sound. It belongs to the rhythm of this place now. You exhale, and the night finishes folding into day. You awaken to the scent of wood smoke and the far-off clang of steel. It is the spring of 1877, and the earth beneath your feet feels tense, not with excitement, but with the deep stillness that comes before something ancient ends. You're in the southern region of Kyushu, not far from the city of Kumamoto. Around you, the hills are quiet, too quiet. Cherry blossoms drift through the air like soft warnings. Somewhere in the distance, the old world has decided it will not go quietly. The Satsuma Rebellion has begun. At the heart of it is a figure almost mythical in stature, Saigo Takamori, a towering samurai of noble bearing and rustic charm, once a hero of the Meiji Restoration, now cast as its most tragic challenger. He had helped bring the emperor to power, helped reform the army, helped reshape Japan. And yet, when the reforms stripped the samurai of their stipends, swords, and status, when the new Japan no longer had space for the old code, Saigo could not abide. Now, he marches with a band of loyal warriors, former samurai farmers, even a few merchants dressed in simple uniforms and armed with a mix of traditional blades and whatever rifles they can find. They do not fight for gold, or even for victory. They fight for memory. You wander into a village caught in the path of the conflict. The villagers are quiet, somber, caught between loyalty and fear. One elderly woman sews a banner with Saigo's name on it, not because she supports rebellion, but because he once helped her family during a famine. Her fingers tremble with each stitch. You hear the rumble of cannon fire not far off. Kumamoto Castle, once proud and impenetrable, now faces siege by men who grew up beneath its shadow. One quietly human moment lingers with you, a soldier, barely 20, finds himself standing across the field from his childhood friend, one in government uniform, one a rebel. Before battle begins, they bow to each other. It is said they whispered apologies across the space between them. The battle wages for weeks. The Imperial Army, bolstered by conscripts and modern weaponry, slowly pushes back the rebellion. Steamships deliver reinforcements. Telegraph lines buzz with daily reports. The samurai fight bravely, but they are no match for artillery and order. Still, they do not flee. You find yourself on the outskirts of Shiroyama, the final stand. Saigo, wounded and weary, refuses to surrender. In the early hours of morning, surrounded, he kneels beneath a pine tree with his closest retainers. What happens next is still debated. Some say he takes his own life in the samurai tradition of seppuku, aided by a faithful friend. Others believe he died from wounds sustained in battle. Historians still disagree. Some claim his final words were, "Let me die with honor." Others believe he said nothing at all, simply closed his eyes and allowed the silence to speak for him. Regardless of how it ended, the message is clear. The last great samurai rebellion is over. The old code, Bushido, has taken its final bow on the battlefield. You return to Tokyo weeks later. The newspapers are already publishing woodblock illustrations of the conflict, romanticized and tragic. Children reenact battles in the street, wooden swords clashing in the dusk. One boy insists he is Saigo, noble to the end, and yet something shifts in the air. There is grief, yes, but also clarity. Japan, it seems, has chosen its path. You stand at a shrine erected in Saigo's honor. Despite rebelling, he is remembered not as a traitor, but as a man of deep principle, a symbol of integrity even in resistance. The scent of incense drifts across your shoulders. The wind has changed. The era of the sword is over, and somewhere in the city, a tailor sews yet another school uniform, buttons polished, ready for tomorrow's lessons. You awaken to the scent of fresh cedar and the soft chime of a bell echoing through morning mist. The year is 1880 and you find yourself kneeling on smooth stones before a Shinto shrine, tucked quietly into a hillside overlooking the capital. The structure is simple: red beams, white curtains, straw ropes, but the air is thick with reverence. You're not alone. A slow stream of visitors comes and goes, students bowing in crisp uniforms, mothers with infants strapped to their backs, old men whispering prayers for peace and good harvest. They clap twice, bow, and offer coins at the altar, just as their ancestors did for centuries. But something is changing. Look closer, and you'll see it. Along the path stands a small wooden sign that reads, "This shrine is recognized as a state institution." It's subtle, almost easy to overlook, but its meaning is immense. Shinto, once a loose collection of folk practices and seasonal rites, is now being reshaped, carefully, officially, into national faith. This is part of what's now called State Shinto, a government-driven effort to centralize spiritual life around the emperor. Shrines are no longer just local places of worship. They are arms of identity, vessels of nationhood. You rise and walk the grounds. A priest in snowy robes sweeps the courtyard, pausing only to adjust a lantern knocked askew by the wind. He bows as you pass. You wonder how he feels about these reforms, whether he whispers the old stories still of Kami and the rocks and rivers, or now recites state-approved prayers nearby. A teacher leads a group of children in reciting the imperial rescript on education. Each line ends with a small bow. The rescript itself praises loyalty, filial piety, and devotion to the emperor, virtues wrapped in sacred rhythm. You overhear a curious phrase: the emperor is descended from the gods. It is spoken not as poetry, but as policy, a belief codified not in scripture, but in textbooks. One quiet, quirky detail emerges from this period. In the rush to modernize shrines, the Ministry of Home Affairs began issuing rankings, classifying which shrines were of greater importance. Some priests, eager to elevate their standing, embellished local legends or added grand torii gates overnight. One shrine even claimed its kami had recently learned Western languages. Historians continue to debate the intention behind state Shinto. Was it purely about unity, a spiritual balm to soothe the ache of rapid change, or was it a subtle machinery for control, reinforcing hierarchy through ritual? Some argue it was both faith used to anchor a drifting society, and also to gently steer it. You leave the shrine and walk through the city, where new institutions and old customs weave together like braided rope. On a bridge, two boys debate whether kami can ride trains. One insists, yes, that gods now travel by telegraph. The other says gods prefer horses and old bells. They both laugh. You turn down a quiet street and pass a home altar glowing with soft candlelight. A mother places a bowl of rice before a tiny Shinto talisman and murmurs a prayer, not for the nation, but for her son's fever to break, for rain, for safety. The human prayers never really change. Above you, the imperial palace rises like a silhouette, no longer just the seat of governance, but the axis of a slowly crafted mythology. You pause at a lantern as a breeze brushes past. The flame wavers, then steadies. You close your eyes, listening to the silence behind the bell chimes. And you wonder, as so many do when a nation puts its faith into a symbol, who carries the burden, the people, the emperor, or the space in between. You awaken to the rustle of parchment and the low murmur of an expectant crowd. It is 1889, and something long promised is about to be unveiled. You find yourself standing near the steps of the new imperial palace in Tokyo, not the ancient halls of Kyoto, but the freshly designed, half-Western structure of stone and glass and modernity. Today, the Meiji Constitution will be proclaimed. Around you, people gather in quiet waves, officials in crisp uniforms, scholars with notebooks, even curious labourers who've taken the day off to see history unfold. Cherry blossoms cling stubbornly to bare branches, not quite ready to bloom, as if nature itself is holding its breath. Inside the palace, behind drawn curtains, Emperor Meiji prepares for the ceremony. He wears a Western military coat laced with a gold embroidery, his sword polished to perfection. His expression is unreadable, distant, yet composed. He holds in his hands not a weapon, but a document, the Constitution that will define a new empire. When he steps forward and reads the preamble aloud, the hall goes silent. Though you stand outside, you can hear his voice echo through the open doors. The Empire of Japan shall be reigned over and governed by a line of emperors unbroken for ages eternal. The crowd bows, and the moment sinks in like a stone into still water. The Constitution, drafted with heavy influence from German legal systems, grants a parliamentary structure. There will be a diet, with an elected House of Representatives. There will be ministers and laws, rights and procedures. On paper, it resembles a modern constitutional monarchy, and yet, you peer more closely at the scroll handed to a passing official. You see it there in elegant calligraphy. The emperor is sacred and inviolable. The power still rests above. This blend of old and new stirs debate. Scholars today still argue, was this document a step toward democracy or merely a clever shell around imperial rule? Some say it allowed real discourse to begin. Others call it theatre, legalism in service of control. You walk through the city as news spreads. Printers work into the night churning out copies of the document. One bookseller has pasted excerpts across his window. People gather to read by lamplight, pointing at the kanji and murmuring interpretations. A small moment, a boy asks his grandmother, "What's a constitution?" She frowns, then simply replies, "A promise with paper." It's not entirely wrong. Later that week, new ceremonies are held across the country. In Sendai, school children sing hymns to the emperor. In Nagasaki, a city council holds its first formal meeting under the new charter. Not much changes immediately, but the air feels different, more procedural, more official. You pass a sake house where two friends debate Article 29, the protection of property. One insists it means his land is safe from interference. The other jokes that it just means taxes are now constitutional. They toast anyway. Nearby, an elderly samurai-turned-schoolmaster carefully folds a printed copy of the Constitution into a wooden box. He whispers, "I never thought I'd see a government with both swords and pens." Then he adds, almost shyly, "I hope the pens are sharp." The Emperor, for his part, returns to the inner chambers of the palace. He does not bask in applause. He simply removes his gloves, hands the scroll to an attendant, and walks quietly away. Outside, the crowd disperses. There is no riotous cheer, no parade, just the slow, collective recognition that something profound has occurred. A modern government now exists, not perfect, not fully representative, but undeniably real. A scaffold upon which the empire can climb. You sit on a bench beside the palace moat as the lanterns flicker on. The moonlight casts the parchment-white reflections of the palace windows onto the water's surface. There, they shimmer, not quite stable, but still holding. You awaken beneath a high-vaulted ceiling made of dark wood, surrounded by the low, muffled creak of benches and the rustle of silk and paper. The year is 1890, and you are inside the new seat of Japan's national government. The first imperial diet is convening, and the halls are filled with quiet anticipation. You take a seat near the back of the House of Peers, where noblemen in formal attire, some in western frock coats, others still in traditional hakama, speak in tones so hushed you must lean forward to hear. The room is large but intimate, filled with a kind of uncertain reverence. No one is quite sure how loudly to speak yet. No one wants to get it wrong. Across the hall, in the House of Representatives, things are slightly less restrained. This lower house is elected, well, in part, only about 1% of the population, male landowners over a certain threshold, can vote. But even so, it's a shift, a voice, a platform, a beginning. You listen as members stand to debate budgets, argue over railroad funding, propose school policies. Some are eloquent, some fumble nervously. One man refers to the emperor in every other sentence, unsure if that's required or simply respectful. Another reads his speech directly from a scroll, never looking up. It is democracy in its infancy, wide-eyed, buttoned up, and trying not to trip. Outside, the press waits with inked fingers and sharpened brushes. The next day's newspapers will report every misstep and flourish. One humorous headline is rumoured to have read, "Diet member falls asleep," during tax reform speech, claims it was meditative reflection. Even the cartoons are gentle. You step out for air and find yourself in the government garden, where two young messengers sit on a bench, comparing notes. One says he likes the Diet building, the way the sound carries inside like a temple. The other shrugs and says it smells like old tatami. They both agree the benches are uncomfortable. Historians are still divided on how impactful this first Diet was. Some argue it was more symbolic than legislative, that the real power remained in the emperor's cabinet, unelected and shielded by legal distance. Others point to how quickly the members began to test the boundaries of their role, pushing for more oversight, more control, more say. And slowly, the culture began to shift. In newspapers across the country, editorials began referring to the government not just as the emperor's ministers, but as something people could engage with. Young men wrote letters to representatives. Rural villages discussed tax bills. Even school children began holding mock debates in classrooms, some reciting lines they copied straight from newspaper clippings. You return to the chamber just as a vote is called. The members stand, murmur, shuffle, bow. It's slow, awkward, but deliberate. The Emperor, and of course, does not attend. He remains a figure above, a sacred presence woven through every article of the Constitution, but physically distant. And perhaps that is fitting, a symbol too vast for the walls of any hall. You look around the room and realize this isn't just a hall of governance. It's a classroom, a stage, a forge. You imagine decades from now, others will sit in these chairs, perhaps bolder, perhaps more skeptical, but they'll owe their place to this moment. A sparrow flutters by the window, perching briefly before darting away. You watch it disappear into the city sky. The chamber's quiet again, the sound of one voice rising over all, deliberate, nervous, hopeful, and beneath it, the ancient heartbeat of Japan continues, now slightly syncopated to the sound of debate. You awaken to the low thrum of engines and the scent of salt hanging heavy in the wind. It is the summer of 1894 and you're aboard a Japanese warship sailing past the Korean coastline. The deck is busy but calm. Sailors in neatly pressed uniforms coil ropes, polish brass fittings, and glance toward the distant horizon where dark clouds threaten more than just rain. The First Sino-Japanese War has begun. Though it will not last long, less than a year, this war marks a turning point. For centuries, China had been the dominant power in East Asia. Now, Japan, newly armed and quietly ambitious, seeks not just recognition, but equality among empires. The conflict begins over control and influence in Korea, a land long caught between Chinese tradition and Japanese proximity. When tensions rise and armed clashes erupt, Japan acts swiftly, sending troops, ships, and supplies across the sea. The message is clear. This is no longer the Japan of closed ports and folded fans. You walk across the deck as an officer explains the fleet's readiness. Steam engines churn steadily below your feet, propelling modern ironclads through waters once sailed by wooden junks. Cannons are polished and loaded. Signal flags flap overhead like crisp lines of code. Below deck, a young conscript writes a letter home by lamplight. You catch a glimpse of his words, "I never thought I'd sail beyond Kyushu. Mother, I promised to send back news of glory, or at least of something important." He folds the paper carefully, presses it to his forehead, and slides it into his satchel. The first major engagement takes place near the Yalu River, where Japan's navy faces off against the Qing dynasty's Beiyang fleet. Despite China's larger ships, Japan's better-trained crews and superior tactics win the day. The sea battle is swift, deadly, and decisive. You read reports printed days later in Tokyo newspapers, hand-drawn illustrations of Japanese sailors cheering on the decks, articles describing brave sons of the emperor in poetic terms. The press, once cautious, now speaks boldly of national pride. And yet, not all voices are triumphant. In tea houses and schoolyards, you hear murmurs, soft but thoughtful. Some wonder whether Japan is growing too proud, too fast, whether it risks becoming what it once resisted, a conquering power. One quietly charming anecdote surfaces from the battlefield. A Japanese soldier, upon taking a Chinese position, reportedly paused to return a captured enemy's fallen glasses before accepting his surrender. The moment was brief, but passed along like folklore, a fragment of humanity in the smoke. Historians still ponder the war's greater meaning. Was it purely strategic a move to secure Korea and protect national interests, or was it a test, a demonstration to Western powers that Japan, too, could build empires and command respect. The answers remain layered and nuanced. The Treaty of Shimonoseki is signed in April 1895. Japan gains Taiwan, fishing rights, and significant influence in Korea. But celebrations are cut short when Russia, France, and Germany, the so-called triple intervention, pressure Japan to return some of its winnings. The humiliation stings. You sit on a bench outside the foreign ministry, where a clerk frowns over diplomatic cables and mutters, "So this is what power feels like, heavy and borrowed." The emperor, distant as always, offers no speech. His court maintains composure. But the lesson is clear. Even victory can be reshaped by the hands of others. As you walk back through the city, you pass a new statue being carved, a bronze sailor holding the imperial flag, his gaze cast toward the continent. The sculptor pauses and looks up. "Do you think it looks brave enough?" he asks. You say yes, though the statue's face looks more worried than proud. And perhaps that's fitting. The war is over, but the age of Japanese expansion, of ambition, risk, and complex reckonings is just beginning. The sea breeze catches your sleeve. The waves whisper softly below. You step off the dock as the sun sets behind the sails. You awaken beneath a paper awning, the ink-stained air of a Tokyo print shop swirling around you. The year is 1895, just months after Japan's stunning victory in the First Sino-Japanese War. And the city pulses with a strange new energy, one part pride, one part uncertainty. The war is over, but its stories have only begun to unfold. You sit beside a young printer who wipes his hands on an apron smeared with black ink. He gestures to the metal type blocks before him and says, with a grin, "This is where battles are remembered. Around you, workers set type by hand, rolling ink over plates, turning cranks, feeding paper into the maw of machines that sound like slow, patient thunder. Newspapers are no longer rare curiosities, they're daily rituals. Headlines scream in bold characters, 'Glory at sea, our boys in Korea. Imperial honor preserved,' the public reads with hungry eyes. School children repeat phrases from front-page editorials, cartoons, woodblock prints, and serialized war tales become part of the cultural landscape. It's said that after the Battle of Port Arthur, children in the capital began marching through alleys, waving flags and singing patriotic songs they didn't fully understand. A child you pass today wears a paper naval cap, his bamboo sword slung over his back. "I'm Admiral Ito," he says proudly. He's 4. You stroll through a tea house where merchants and students gather to argue over the war's lessons. One man insists Japan should now demand equality with Western powers. Another, older, warns of hubris. "The sea is deep," he mutters, "and always watching." Even literature begins to change. You browse through a bookstore filled with new essays and pamphlets. Some celebrate victory. Others ask harder questions. What kind of empire do we wish to become? Have we truly honored the emperor's will? Are we still Japanese, or are we something new? You pause at a striking image on a broadside, a hand-colored woodblock print of a Japanese soldier offering water to a wounded Chinese prisoner. It's idealized, certainly, but it reveals the nation's inattention. The same presses that praise the army's triumph also attempt to portray its mercy. It's as if Japan is learning to craft not only power, but its public image. One lesser-known but fascinating tidbit: some Tokyo newspapers began offering free maps of the war front, printed on thin rice paper so readers could follow the daily reports. Families pinned them on walls, marking battles with little pins and red threads. Geography became personal, and yet not all voices were heard. Historians still point out the limits of this media bloom. While the press was freer than ever before, it was also subtly steered. Censorship existed, not always through law, but through expectation. Journalists learned what pleased the censors, what gained subscriptions, and what might quietly vanish from the next edition. Back at the print shop, the young typesetter sighs as he lines up characters for the next morning's headline. "Do you think we'll ever print peace in the same size as war?" he asks, not looking up. His inked fingers tremble just slightly. You leave the shop and walk down the street where banners still hang from the rooftops. Victory parades have ended, but their shadows remain. Statues are being planned. Textbooks are being revised. And as you glance upward, you notice something subtle but new. Small rooftop antennas, telegraph wires and signal rods, reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. Messages travel faster than ever. So do emotions. So does nationalism. You pause before a small shrine nestled between two houses. A young woman kneels and lights incense for her brother, lost at Pyongyang. Her child sleeps on her back. The smoke rises slowly, as though unwilling to leave. Victory has come, but peace has changed. You listen to the gentle rhythm of the printing press still pounding in the distance. Words, 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 forming the next page of history. And as the last light of day fades behind Tokyo's rooftops, the newsboys are already running. You awaken in the cold dawn of Port Arthur, where frost clings to rooftops and chimneys trail thin threads of steam into the sea-stained sky. But you're not here for sunrise. You're here for something far more thunderous. It is 1904 and the Russo-Japanese War has begun. The harbour is quiet, deceptively so. Far out on the water, Japanese battleships move like shadows, their hulls low and dark, their guns already angled toward the enemy. You walk the muddy lanes of a field camp pitched just beyond the coastal hills. Soldiers in khaki uniforms huddle around cook fires, sipping barley tea from metal cups. Some write letters home, others sit silently, staring toward the front, where the port still smoulders from last night's bombardment. Even in stillness, war breathes loudly. Russia, an imperial titan, has clashed with Japan over control of Korea and Manchuria. Few believed Japan would dare to strike first. Fewer believed they could win, but strike they did. You pause beside a mess tent where a lieutenant reads a war bulletin aloud to his men. His voice is calm but weighted. The mood is somber, not from fear, but from the understanding that this conflict is different. This is not a defensive war. This is a war of standing, of pride, of proving to the world that Japan is not merely rising, but risen. At sea, Japanese destroyers hunt Russian vessels under the cover of night. On land, General Nogi Maresuke prepares for siege warfare that will drag on for months. Artillery shells churn the landscape into twisted soil and sorrow. Telegraph lines buzz with constant updates. Photographers and foreign journalists gather nearby, watching, recording, writing. Back in Tokyo, the home front is awash in fervour. You walk through a neighbourhood where every doorway bears a fluttering flag. Posters urge boys to enlist, women to write letters, children to donate rice. Even the emperor, still largely removed from direct command, is seen more often in newspapers now, his image a silent rallying point. One curious human moment catches your ear in a small post office. A child writes to Papa at the big Cold War on the front of an envelope. He doesn't know what Manchuria is. He just knows it's far and dangerous. You return to the battlefield weeks later, the snow now thicker, the air sharper. The siege of Port Arthur continues. Bodies lie beneath white drifts. Soldiers, Japanese and Russian alike, huddle in trenches only meters apart. One night, it is said, carols drift across the lines, sung softly in Russian, then answered by a single Japanese flute. Historians often point to this war as the moment Japan truly entered the global stage, not as a student of the West, but as its peer and, in some cases, its superior. The Battle of Tsushima, where the Japanese Navy decimates the Russian Baltic Fleet, sends shockwaves across Europe. Western papers struggle to explain it. How could a non-European nation defeat a great power? Racist theories crumble beneath facts. Old empires shift uneasily in their chairs. Yet scholars still question Japan's motives. Was this victory merely defensive, or the first step in an expansionist dream? Was the nation claiming respect or territory in Tokyo? Celebrations erupt after victory is declared in 1905. Peace comes with the Treaty of Portsmouth, mediated by President Theodore Roosevelt. Japan gains control of Port Arthur, the southern half of Sakhalin Island, and increased influence over Korea. But the crowds back home are restless. The treaty is not generous enough. Many say there were no reparations, no further lands. Riots break out in Hibiya Park. Shops are looted. The government reels from the blow, not of war, but of unmet expectations. You sit on a bench in the capital and read the day's newspaper. Its pages flutter in the wind. The headline boasts triumph, but the editorials whisper warning. Victory is a hungry thing. One column read, feed it too often, and it forgets what it cost you. You walk home beneath lanterns shaped like stars. A boy beside you pretends to be a battleship, arms outstretched, mouth making cannon sounds. His mother hushes him gently. Far away, on quiet waves, the ships begin their return, and Japan, victorious yet uncertain, sails deeper into the 20th century. You awaken in a silent hallway of the Imperial Palace, where even footsteps are muffled by thick carpet and the air smells faintly of pine ink and sandalwood. The year is 1910. The drums of war have quieted. The treaties have been signed, and now, in this hush, the figure who guided it all from behind the veil sits in quiet reflection. Emperor Meiji is no longer the boy poet of Kyoto, nor the sharp-eyed reformer of the 1870s. Now in his late 50s, he rules from behind layers of protocol, surrounded by officials who speak his will in careful phrases. He is rarely seen in public. When he is, he appears statuesque, stiff in Western dress, adorned with medals and golden braid, his gaze distant beneath the brim of a military cap. And yet, in these shadowed halls, there are moments when the emperor is simply a man. You pass a small garden enclosed within the palace walls, where he sometimes walks alone in the early morning. He does not speak. He listens to the crows, to the rustling of bamboo. Occasionally he picks up a fallen blossom, examines it, and lets it fall again. His writings still appear, quiet poems in classical waka form. One, recently copied by hand and posted at a school gate, reads even among flowers. The cherry blossom stands out. Still, I do not boast. It says more than policy ever could. Around the nation, the pace of life accelerates. Railroads have stretched from Hokkaido to Kyushu. Cities gleam with electric lamps and stone buildings. This school system is producing a new generation of literate, duty-bound citizens. Japan has annexed Korea. The military is strong. The emperor's dream, or at least the one carried out in his name, has largely come true. But here, in these quiet corridors, the tone is different. An attendant whispers that His Majesty hasn't spoken much this week, that he's taken to writing longhand notes rather than issuing proclamations, that he spends hours in his study looking through old reports from the 1870s, perhaps reminders of a time when change came not from battle, but from belief. You peer into a chamber where officials wait to deliver a ceremonial scroll. They stand in silence, back straight, watching the door. No one speaks unless spoken to. No one looks up. One small, human story floats from the kitchen staff. It's said that the emperor prefers pickled radish and plain rice for breakfast. He rarely asks for elaborate meals. Once, when served French custard, he reportedly paused, took a single bite, and said, "It is fine, but I miss the simplicity of miso." A gentle smile passed among the staff. They never made it again. Historians still debate how directly involved Meiji was in governance by this point. Some argue he remained a guiding mind, reading every memorandum, attending every meeting behind closed screens. Others believe the real work was done by his advisors, the Genro, with Meiji becoming more symbol than steward in his final years. Yet his presence remained profound. You step into a schoolhouse one evening as students rehearse a play about the Charter Oath. A boy in a borrowed uniform reads the part of the emperor, voice trembling. His classmates bow, and for a moment, even they forget its pretend. The emperor, they say, is eternal, unbroken, a sun that does not set. But you have walked his garden. You've seen the ink stains on his desk, the torn corner of a forgotten scroll. You know better. He is a man who watched a nation reforge itself in the space of one lifetime. As dusk falls over Tokyo, you return to the palace gates. Lanterns glow. The guards stand still as statues, and far within, in a quiet chamber lit by a single oil lamp, Emperor Meiji sits with a brush in hand, composing one more poem. The night is long, the empire vast. But within him, a quiet stillness blooms. You awaken to the tolling of bells, soft, deep, and slow. It is 1912 and black banners sway gently over Tokyo. The wind carries a hush through every alley and avenue. Shops close early. Students bow low in their classrooms. Flags hang still at half-mast. The nation is not shouting. It is listening. Emperor Meiji has died. You stand beneath the somber arc of a funeral canopy, watching the procession pass through the heart of a modern city that barely resembles the Japan of his birth. Carriages roll past paved roads. Soldiers in crisp uniforms march in solemn rhythm. White chrysanthemums, the imperial flower, blanket the streets like gentle snowfall. It is the end of an era, not metaphorically, but literally. The Meiji period closes with the life of the emperor who defined it, and though few ever saw him closely, everyone feels the weight of his passing. You walk beside the mourners toward Oyama Cemetery, where the funeral rites will take place. The air is heavy with incense and the scent of summer soil. Farmers have travelled from distant prefectures. Former samurai bow alongside factory workers. School children weep without quite understanding why. And as the coffin passes, an elaborate yet understated casket, carried with reverent precision. You hear a sound you've never heard before silence across all of Tokyo. Even the electric trams have halted. For a full minute, nothing moves. You remember, suddenly, how this all began. A boy in Kyoto, a shogunate collapsing, a whisper of reform, the rustle of topknots falling to the floor, steamships, syllables, schoolhouses, the Iwakura mission sailing westward, Satsuma swords rising and falling, telegraph wires dancing with wind, Port Arthur burning, parliaments convening, all under his gaze. One tender moment lingers in the air, the emperor's final poem, left unpublished until after his death. Reads simply, "The world has changed much. Still, the mountain stands silent, watching all below." It is said he wrote it in his final week. Historians will debate what he truly believed, how much he guided versus how much he followed. Some argue he was a modernizer in name, not action. Others claim his quiet strength kept the country from breaking under its own ambitions. But almost all agree Emperor Meiji was the axis around which the impossible spun. You pause before his shrine, where a line of mourners stretches into the dusk. A small child steps forward and places a folded paper crane on the altar. His mother kneels beside him and whispers, "Bow gently. He helped build your world," and he did. From a closed, feudal island to a rising industrial power, Japan changed more in his lifetime than most nations do in centuries. Railways, constitutions, factories, parliaments, wars, letters, prayers, all woven into the fabric of a nation that learned, through him, how to be ancient and new at once. Night falls slowly over the city. You walk back through Tokyo's quiet streets. Lamps flicker on. The paper boys do not shout. The typewriters have paused. Even the birds seem to sing more softly. A new era will begin tomorrow, the Taisho era, with its own hopes and its own burdens. But tonight, the empire sleeps in mourning. You close your eyes as the final bell tolls, and the whisper of Meiji passes into history. And now, dear sleepy listener, let your thoughts settle gently, like the last petals of a cherry blossom drifting through the air. You've journeyed through the entire reign of Emperor Meiji, from a shy teenager hidden behind ritual curtains in Kyoto, to a sovereign who stood at the quiet center of Japan's transformation into a modern nation. You've walked train platforms beside startled farmers, shared tea with foreign visitors under lantern-lit halls, listened to schoolchildren recite the Charter Oath with trembling pride. You've watched as ink and steam, silk and steel, reshaped an island into something no longer isolated, but integrated, poised, listening to the wider world, and finally speaking back. And yet, for all its change, so much stayed grounded: the scent of temple incense, the hush of tatami mats, the steady writing of poems in early morning light. So let that quiet carry you now. Let the steady rhythm of history's long breath cradle you. Each whisper of reform, each moment of stillness between battles and bulletins, they're all part of something soft and lasting. Not noise, but memory. Not spectacle, but spirit. You are safe here, among the echoes of emperors, teachers, poets, and farmers. Let your mind drift as the lanterns dim and the wide wooden bridges of Meiji's Japan stretch across a dreaming landscape. You may forget the dates. That's all right. You may forget the names. That's fine too. But let this feeling stay with you. of a world unfolding gently, respectfully, tenderly, beneath your closed eyes. Sleep now, and let the century turn without rush. There's no hurry, no more trains to catch, just the rustle of leaves, the hush of time, and the sound of a quiet voice saying good night.